I'm Brian. I'm an audience member and a speaker today. So next.
Oh.
Hello, I'm Mary.
I'm Lauren Verduzco. Sorry.
We all went at the same time.
Mary.
Go. Hi, I'm Mary Almanza.
Lauren.
I'm Lauren Verduzco. I'll be an audience member and a speaker today.
Next.
Next, me. I am MJ. I am MJ Santoyo, aka Jesus, and I'll be an audience and the speaker too in my speech.
Next.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Durden, and I'm an audience member today.
Hello,
Finally.
I'm Chris Verduzco, and I'll be in the audience with you guys.
Good enough. Who wants to go first? So, first of all, I want to apologize if I offend anybody for my speech. If for any reason this kind of touches you in a certain way, then we could talk about it after the speech. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or anything like that. But what I wanted to bring up today was a policy that America has of allowing private prisons, or excuse me, private corporations to oversee our prison system. As of now, we have about 2.3 billion inmates. That includes juveniles. It includes jails, prisons, county jails. It's better, probably more accurate to say we have 2.3 billion people incarcerated. So basically, the United States population, civilian population, accounts for about 5% of the world's population. However, we house 75% of the world's inmate population. So how that happens, I'm not quite sure. In fact, China, which has 5 times the population that we have, they have a quarter of the inmates that we have. So how this all came about, in 1971, President Nixon declared the so-called war on drugs. And from at that point in time, we only had an inmate population of 196,000, give or take a couple hundred thousand, or sorry, give or take a few thousand. We had 196,000, but today, again, like I say, we're at 2.3 billion. So what's that? 20 years? Okay, so some history on how all this happened. 1983, we would see the first private organization step into the industry of housing inmates. Correction Corporation of America, commonly abbreviated as CCA. They were the first private organization established specifically to house inmates. In fact, they started to house immigrants, and now they're doing business as Core Civic, and their total revenue as of 2018 was 1.8 billion. 1984, Wackenhut Corrections Corporation came on the scene, and their history goes back to 1954, but in 1984 they actually got into the business of housing inmates, and in 2018 their reported revenue was 2.3 billion. 1987, Management and Training Corporation, originally founded in 1981, they got into the game of housing inmates 1987, and because they're not a publicly traded company, they don't have the same, they don't have to report their income like public companies do. So we can only really estimate what their revenue is, but estimates as of now is between 500 million and 1 billion. So how much of that money is tax dollars? And I looked into it, and evidently every year, $7.4 billion of our tax dollars are going to private organizations. Do you think they're giving that money back, putting it back into our public sectors? No, not likely. Now, if we expand that beyond our private prisons, on our total prison system, America spends $80 billion a year on tax dollars. You can rest assured that at least a small chunk of all your tax money is going towards prisons. Now, as far as the comparison of private prisons to public prisons, in 2016, the U.S. Office of the Inspector General did an inspection of the Federal Bureau of Prisons and looked into the private prisons and found that private prisons compared to public prisons are more expensive as well as more dangerous. The findings of the Inspector General concluded that in private prisons, there's a higher report of inmate contraband possession. There's higher rates of sexual, inmate, and staff assaults. There's more use of force by correction officers. There's more frequent facility-wide lockdowns. The disciplinary infractions are much higher than our state facilities and our federal facilities. Private prisons have a practice of using solitary confinement much more than our public sector. And then they found also that inmates are filing more grievances in the public or the private prisons, which essentially amounts to the fact that the private prisons don't have to follow the same rules that the public prisons do. So in a sense, they can sort of make up their rules, but they are overseen by a public hired so-called monitor to make sure they're complying with the rules. But what infractions are reported to this monitor, that's another story altogether. So one thing I wanted to bring up was how these private organizations are getting their contracts. And as it turns out, they're paying off lawmakers. Basically, they call it lobbying, but what they're really doing is paying lawmakers to create laws allowing them to operate, and laws that, such as creating a minimum occupancy ratio. So private prisons have contracts with the state and federal government that says the federal and state governments are responsible for keeping those private prisons at a 90%, let's say, I'm just making that number up, but it's usually about 90-95% capacity. If they fall below that capacity, then as part of their contract, the state and the federal government have to pay extra dividends, sort of like a punishment. So these contracts are being negotiated and how do you advertise, not advertised, but supported by lawmakers. So as it turns out, private prisons in 2003, total expenditures from the 80s to 2003, Management Training Corporation, they reported $1 million going to lawmakers to make laws in their favor. Core Civic, they reported 9.6 million. Geo Corporation, they reported $13 million going to lawmakers to make laws for them. Not for us, for them, so they can make better, bigger profits. In total, $24 million have gone to lawmakers. For what? To make more prisons, to house more inmates. It's no wonder that we house 3/4 of the world's inmates. Now, we could say that rehabilitation, from the private prison's perspective, rehabilitation reduces their profits. Why? Because when an inmate is rehabilitated, he doesn't come back to prison. So, as we rehabilitate inmates, the prison population theoretically should lower, which should theoretically cost the private prisons money. It doesn't work exactly like that, but that's the hope. So in 2012, and I had, this took a while to research to find what I needed, but in 2012, the private prisons admitted to the fact that rehabilitation is counterintuitive to profit making. So there's an annual report to the US Securities Exchange. Core Civic admitted the demands for our facilities and services could be adversely affected by leniency in conviction or parole standards and sentencing practices. On the subject of justice reform, they continued on saying potentially reduced demand for justice reform could potentially reduce demand for facilities to house inmates. Well, isn't that what we're trying to do, is lower the inmate population? Well, no, not in the eyes of the private prisons. So what, at the end of the day, I want you to take home with you is that private prisons profit from America's incarceration. Rehabilitation reduces recidivism. Recidivism is the rate people return to prison after being released. Rehabilitation has a proven efficacy to reduce that rate. Lower recidivism means lower prison populations. Lower prison populations means less profit for the private prisons. So, what I would ask you to do is ask yourself this: what financial gain do private prisons have in rehabilitating our friends and family? And with that, I'll leave you to come up with the answers on your own. Thank you.